the good news is that I don't know anything about this topic, right? So for my prep, so please don't slash me. For my prep, I read Sri Raman Sobek's paper about slashing and token toxicity and what the trade-offs are, but I didn't really understand it. So you guys are in luck. So first of all, Justin, let's start with you. So the Solana guys sometimes joke about Ethereum slashing, and they slash this, slash that, and Ethereum seems to like slashing a lot. So what is slashing, and why does Ethereum consensus rely on slashing?
Right, so slashing is a superpower that you have in proof of stake relative to proof of work. It's a mechanism for the network to heal itself against attacks. Basically, you can very precisely identify the attacker and excise them from the network, just like you would try and excise a cancer from a body. And so it's a very powerful tool, again, to try and heal from attacks.
Cool. So what type of attacks are we thinking about when we make the trade-off between, let's say, slashing or no slashing? What sort of attacks cannot be handled by protocols that do not implement slashing?
So there's the two flavors of slashing, right? There's the fully deterministic slashing that can be implemented within consensus, and then there's the more subjective slashing, which can be implemented at the social layer. The subjective stuff can be, you can slash for like arbitrary conditions. So the design space is pretty large. For the objective stuff, one of the main things is equivocation, and specifically when you have two inconsistent finalized checkpoints, you can slash those who voted for both checkpoints. And because in order to finalize, you need at least 2/3 of the validators, the intersection of 2/3 and 2/3 is 1/3. And so you'd slash at least 1/3 of the validators.
Cool. So Pranav, thank you for joining us. So have you been involved with the eigenlayer?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I've talked with Steve a decent bit about this stuff.
I read a 44-page paper on something, intersubjective something, and I understood like 4 pages of it. All I figured out was that, okay, we don't want to slash Ethereum, so we're going to slash something else, so that there is no hard fork or something. What are your thoughts on, as a researcher, what are your thoughts on networks that implement slashing, like Ethereum, and have been very careful in how we implement slashing, and networks like Solana? So what's the trade-off space?
I mean, I think from a theoretical point of view, slashing is purely good in the sense that like if like assuming the protocol works as stated, assuming slashing conditions are kind of like correctly evaluated and whatnot, you kind of just expand the type of economic security claims you can make when you have slashing. And as kind of Justin was alluding to, you can kind of have stronger guarantees in terms of how much stake can be malicious and how much you can recover from, in the sense you can't if you don't have slashing. I think kind of the downside of slashing is kind of morally purely like kind of in an applied sense, that like if there's engineering challenges that you slash incorrectly, or you have benign people who, in an ideal like more theoretical world, the only reason somebody signs for conflicting checkpoints is because they're malicious. And in the practical world, somebody might have a faulty box. And so I think that's kind of the trade-off of, if you want to have the more strong theoretical guarantees, slashing is good. At the downside of sometimes practically you might like harm honest users.
So I have a DApp node at home, and so I stayed from home, and I went away to California for a month, and my 14-year-old son was very kind to unplug it. So you don't get slashed for that, but it did feel like getting slashed. So So I think so Ethereum has this. So we are relying on perfect code, is what you're saying, right? So
well, I wouldn't go that far. I would just say kind of when you're evaluating the trade-offs. I think I would say in a theoretical world you should always have slashing. There's no reason not to have slashing, basically. And the only reason not to have it is kind of, it's hard to kind of justify these things rigorously, but there's some UX thing, there's some people feel bad if they're honest and they get slashed.
So let me FUD EigenLayer a bit, right, as an investor and supporter. So EigenLayer has this unique combination where so Sriram says that the AVSs are secured using the security of Ethereum, right? So using restaked ETH, but then you're not slashing ETH. So is it really secured by Ethereum, or is it secured by the Eigen token?
I mean, I think there's different stages here. So I think the EigenLayer has a lot of moving parts right now. It's kind of hard to nail on exactly what you're talking about. And so I think there is currently the intersubjective mechanism and the more objective mechanism, which are two separate things. And so I guess starting with kind of the more objective mechanism they have, where you can kind of provide security through restaked ETH. In this setting, there's no slashing yet, kind of because of this more applied reason of there's lots of ways you can mess up with bugs and slashing conditions that could be bad.
Toghrul was shaking his head, so I'd like to hear the other side.
No, I was just shaking my head because I think it's funny when people say EigenLayer gets Ethereum security, because it doesn't. So the only way it can. So basically, EigenLayer gets a portion of Ethereum's economic security by restaking a portion of staked ETH. But even if it gets all the ETH gets restaked into EigenLayer, that's not Ethereum security, because Ethereum full nodes don't verify what happens on the AVSs. They just give their economic power to basically back up whatever AVSs are doing. So it's different. So if I run an Ethereum full node, you run a validator, so you have that. And you restake, you don't actually provide the security of your full node.
It's like an insurance company that doesn't pay up, right?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far, but
So yeah, it's great. It's securing you and things like but if something goes wrong, then
it's still securing you through slashing. So it provides certain economic security, but it doesn't secure you the way Ethereum secures you if you use Ethereum.
We'll go more into that. But Avalanche, right? So what are the design trade-offs that Avalanche made with regards to slashing? You didn't really implement slashing natively.
So first thing, I want to go back to that. I actually think and maybe this is a hot take, but I think the security of full nodes is kind of overblown, to be perfectly honest. If you actually look at what proof of stake security guarantees are providing, it's primarily the economic or proof of stake security. All you really need is a couple of full nodes. They're not providing any additional censorship resistance or things like that. Now it is important to have them for things like mempool gossip or state sync and being able to join the network, but you don't need to have 10,000 nodes or whatever Ethereum's at. So that's maybe, sorry to totally break away from your question, but anyways. Going back to the question about Avalanche and slashing. So Avalanche doesn't have principal slashing. So if you stake your funds, you're not going to lose them at the end of the day. But they do have what is called an uptime reward module and things like that. So essentially at the end of your staking period, it determines whether or not you are sufficiently online and behaving correctly to get rewards. So that's still a slashing mechanism. I think, as Justin said, slashing is an extremely powerful tool, and it's good to use in various places.
So if you read, that's why I shared the link, right? Sriram and Sabik's paper, they specifically talk about bribery attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a point at which an external party can incentivize misbehavior to the point that the Byzantine party essentially earns more by misbehaving because they're not getting slashed. So the basic idea there is that it's like Lehman Brothers. You blow out and everyone else pays for it, but you get bailed out because there is a bribery. It's like someone is out there to bail you out. So there is an incentive at a point. If you're not getting slashed, then you essentially, everyone shares in the losses, but then you get bribed enough to essentially attack the network. That's my understanding as a
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct.
So why doesn't Avalanche kind of handle that scenario, and what are the trade-offs there?
So I think, as we talked about a little bit before as well, there's a lot of practical implications of slashing. So I'm actually really interested.
You don't trust your code?
I don't think anyone should trust their code by like those levels of even if I was actually talking about formal verification earlier, and I think formal verification in and of itself is actually really difficult because you have to define your theorem. I could go on an entire rant here, but anyways. So yeah, no, I think there's a lot of practical reasons why slashing can be really concerning. I think especially in the world where you're trying to push like client diversity. So Ethereum is really leading this effort, and so I'm actually very inspired by that. But in a world where you have a number of clients, I'm very concerned that at some point you'll have a minority client that has a bug, which all of a sudden causes a mass slashing on that minority client, and which just kill that minority client. Like no one would reuse that. So that's, I think that there are problems with that, just in implementation bugs, things like that. I know Avalanche right now is almost entirely run off a single client. So, there's a lot of room for improvement there for sure. But I think that there are things like that that really need to be thought of in the slashing conversation. So.
I think in an ideal world, everything works perfectly and everything. Accountable slashing, I think, intersubjectivity and stuff. I'm not really buying it that much, but like accountable slashing makes total sense.
I don't like this
Sorry for flooding your bags. It's a net positive. I think there's no argument there. My problem is that it introduces a lot of side effects that are negative from the UX perspective. So for example, it makes delegation more difficult, it makes liquid staking tokens more difficult, etc., etc. So there are certain things that might make the protocol worse, even though it has slashing, because there are certain other vectors that make it more centralized by introducing slashing. So I think that's my main argument why I'm not convinced that slashing is necessary, is because people often don't think about the side effects that it introduces. It's like, oh yeah, it's accountable safety, whatever. It's great, but like it's not that simple, unfortunately.
So I think Justin, we have to defend Sriram here in his absence. His presence looms large in the room. So what are your thoughts on intersubjective? So, yeah, like and sort of intersubjective situations where slashing should be implemented not on Ethereum but on something else.
I like it. I think intersubjective slashing kind of increases the design space, because now we go from objective to subjective slashing conditions. And there's some services like data availability or like oracles that fundamentally require that. So that's good. If we didn't have the intersubjective slashing, the natural thing to do would be to use a token like ETH to collateralize. But then now you're kind of overloading the social layer, because if things go wrong, which they might, then the only layer that can fix it is the social layer.
We've been through that with the DAO hack. I never want to go through that again.
Exactly.
No.
Just to add something, I think a lot of people don't know, but the inventors of intersubjective slashing were actually Chainlink. Because they had basically a multisig that was governing the staking module. So if the staking module attested to a wrong thing, the multisig would just slash them.
Oh, wait. Multisig, that's objective, right? Like there's objectively some pub keys that control the thing. That is...
No, but
if you can attribute faults
objectively... But they were not attributable there. So for example, if I provide a wrong price oracle, they would slash me via the...
Yeah, but that's just governance. That's not intersubjective slashing.
Yeah, I know. Just like...
Got you there, Toghrul. You're gonna be slashed because sorry.
Out of the panel.
That's a reward. Anyway, so what are the other trade-offs in the design space of slashing, right? As in, how much do you slash? How do you sort of tune and say, okay, for double signing you lose X, do you lose your entire stake, or do you lose 10% of your stake? So how do you sort of tune that, and what are the implications of setting a parameter like that or other parameters on the behavior of participants in a network?
I think Ethereum actually has a cool way of slashing, because like slashing depends on how many other people also violated the conditions. So let's say if you're the only one who violated the safety conditions, then the slashing is negligible. I don't remember the exact number, but
I think it's
small.
1 ETH.
Yeah, it's 1/8. It's relatively acceptable.
Is
So,
that enough? Or?
but the problem, the good thing here is like if you're the only one violating, that means that it's probably a bug, because there's no viable attack by you being the only one who's violating, and the more people who violate the conditions, the safety conditions, the more you get slashed. So that means that basically, if it's an actual attack, then people are actually going to lose a lot of money, which is a good thing. And then if it's just a bug, then whatever. It's like it's still a penalty, but you can recover from that.
So, so Justin, you were on the panel, on the Bankless podcast with our best friend Anatoly.
Yes.
And I think he gave Ethereum a lot of credit for being well engineered. That was one of the bright spots of that. So,
One of the few.
So I think.
I disagree with him.
You disagree with him? Is that your default position?
No, it's just that over the years we've discovered like design flaws that we wish we could fix, and we're trying to fix them. And
So what would you change in Ethereum's consensus with regards to slashing specifically, if you could just change? I mean, do you think it's perfect as it is, or?
I think it's pretty good. I'm not too unhappy with the slashing. I mean, one argument to be said is like maybe 1 ETH minimum should be 0 ETH, right? Because if it's accidental, then I mean, one of the ideas that Toghrul just gave me is, okay, why don't we have 0 slashing unless we know for sure it's a 51% attack, in which case we trigger the slashing. The disadvantage of that is that we won't be able to use the slashing as a deterrence against correlated failures. So we want to try and deter centralization and large operators, and that's kind of this roundabout way at getting at that. So it's not only about deterring and healing from 51% attacks, but it's also just a health thing where we try and descent.
So Pranav, why haven't we seen slashing in, let's say, DAOs or things that aren't necessarily blockchains, but like involve some level of social consensus on the behavior of participants, like Uniswap or I mean, I haven't seen let's say Avail or Uniswap implement any kind of social slashing, or they have and I'm missing it.
Coming soon to
Yeah. I mean, I guess for these other, for the other DAOs, I'm not sure an example of where slashing would help you in terms of I mean, I think the way I view slashing is basically kind of via stake, you delegate responsibilities to do tasks, and then slashing basically says if you mess up the task, we'll slash you. I'm not sure DAO, nothing immediately comes to mind of a DAO that looks like that in terms of its kind of permission, if you are using the DAO in a use governance to elect people to do things, then slashing, you could use slashing, but in some sense, like, the permission nature is doing that for you, and that like the person, if they mess up, presumably lose reputation, they don't get elected again. I'm not sure I know of a DAO that does something like it uses stake to like elect people to do things, and then based off that. And I think the key thing is the permissionlessness is what makes slashing powerful. And that like kind of you don't need you don't need to know who the person
We talk about
is.
social slashing a lot, right? So
Sure.
What is social slashing?
Well, I feel like
What are
social.
the trade-offs with regards to programmatic versus social slashing?
Yeah, so the nice thing with social slashing is in some sense you can't have bugs, because like you can if the community decides the wrong thing, right? But in some sense it's kind of like a trade-off you have with like there's inherently code might always have some vulnerability, and like you can do formal verification, we can do our best to fix that. In some sense I almost think of like social slashing as like the ultimate thing. Like it's the closer you get to not having bugs, in the sense of if more than half your community is really malicious in terms of wanting to screw you over, then like what's really saving you to some
I've seen
extent.
DAOs like that.
Sure. I mean, in that case, I think it's like you really are kind of screwed. I mean, if they're willing to like lie to slash you, they could also be willing to like double sign to slash you, presumably. I guess the point there is not the same type of receipt in the social context there is in the kind of programmatic context. But yeah. So I mean, I think social slashing doesn't like really quite mean slashing. I think it's kind of a generic term just used to mean that we change the rules to some extent and to kind of disadvantage or advantage other people, which has the same effect of slashing in terms of, like slashing kind of theoretically is basically saying somebody does something bad and effectively they're signaling they're Byzantine and we reduce their kind of power in the protocol. Yeah. And so in some sense, slashing is basically like that if we have whatever other means we want to do that, but we kind of, as a community that's doing social slashing, decides this party should no longer have power and adjust the rules accordingly.
Like Zeller deciding to slash Gauntlet or something, right? So, anyways. So Stefan, so is there ever going to be slashing on Avalanche's roadmap, or you guys are happy with your architecture as it is?
So I think I commented already that there is kind of already some mechanisms for slashing with uptime tracking and things like that. I think Avalanche is really trying to scale out more than just the primary network. It's trying to have subnets. I think there's a rebrand of calling them like L1s or whatever now. But like it's definitely possible and totally reasonable to have slashing in those mechanisms. Like I'm definitely not like an anti-slashing person. I may have been invited on this panel with that context, but that's definitely not kind of my opinion, right? Like there has been talk about cases where say you have like a malicious proposer that like produces multiple blocks at the same height that is like an attributable fault that could be included. And I think if we look back like across instances of slashing, I think that they're dominated by misconfigurations and not like actual like attacks on any protocol. So I'm definitely not pushing for introducing like any severe like slashing penalties, but I do think things like removing this validator from the proposal set to like fix issues with block production and things like that definitely makes sense. So
why haven't we seen like these game theoretic attacks on networks, bribery attacks on networks that don't feature slashing? Is it because the networks themselves are quite centralized and you can always kind of override or unwind those attacks, or what do you think? I'm not saying Avalanche.
I'll have personal opinions on this. Like, if we look at like proof of stake networks compared to proof of work networks, I think that proof of stake networks, when you actually perform that bribery attack, like you're bribing a quasi-known entity, right? Like unless you're running a permissionless like or a proof of stake network on top of like a privacy like thing or whatever. So like that person that's being bribed is also gonna like potentially have legal action taken against them and like various external like penalties. So I think that a lot of the purely economic focused stuff, which is definitely like good and interesting.
This is the type of situation where Solana recently took Solana Foundation withdrew a lot of their sort of stake from a bunch of validators that were misbehaving with regards to MEV. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but Solana Foundation took a lot of stake back from the validators.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were. I don't know if anyone actually knows that.
So they were sandwiching, and so
yeah, they were sandwiching. Right.
And Solana Foundation decided that it's just
they kind of know
that they don't support it. Yeah. But the way with Solana worked, they had a delegation program where you would have to pass the KYC, etc., to receive funds that you could basically run a validator for, and they just.
So if you know all the validators and their identities in the real world, then you can get by without slashing. Is that what I'm at?
This is not like an opinion thing, right? Like I'm not going to tell you why there haven't been attacks, but there haven't.
Wait. There was a commercial for Ethereum coming.
Do you want to chill it now? I think the answer is just simpler. Like the networks that are actually like make sense to attack in terms of like how much TVL they have, etc., have strong economic security. So it's like not that cheap to attack them. So
how does slashing interact with layer 2s and DAs? I mean, are there some designer considerations?
I think for L2s it actually makes more sense to slash if you let's say operate your own consensus, because on an L1 you can always fall back to social consensus, and even if there's no slashing you can say whatever, screw you, we're not gonna we saw that you double signed, we're just gonna ignore your block. Whereas on an L2 that's not really an option because you fall back to the L1, and the L1 can. The only way it can arbitrate for you is through the smart contract.
What kind of slashing will scroll implement?
I can't really comment on that. You'll have to wait.
Okay. Any? How much time do we have? 15? Okay, we have time. So okay. So give me something you guys disagree about, because that's more fun. So I haven't heard.
I love how the moderator is fishing for questions to ask.
We could talk about full node security if you.
Actually, let's go back to that. I to a certain degree disagree because basically we have layers of security. So we have economic security, then we have physical security. I would call it physical security, which is the full node security, and then on top of that we have social consensus that can supersede everything else. So if economic security fails, we can always fall back to full nodes. So for example, let's say if the majority controls the majority is malicious and they propose an invalid block, if you don't have those full nodes behind it, then you'll just, and everyone's running light clients, you just accept it and say, yeah, whatever. And then you can argue that you can have fraud proofs, etc., but it takes time. And so you have slower finality then, etc. And if, let's say, the full nodes for some reason have a bug or whatever, then you can always fall back to the social layer. So I think the full nodes perform this like middle layer in between economic security and the social consensus, because every time there's some problem on the economic security layer, going to the social consensus is just going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, but like on the full node side, if you've just completely broken the economic security side, like you can essentially just keep flipping and flopping back and forth between potential like canonical states, right? So like you actually like a full node, while yeah, it is able to prevent any like invalid state transitions from being put in. Like I would argue that blockchain is a trust minimization technology which provides you like a global canonical state and also provides you like auditability and stuff. So full nodes being able to actually audit stuff is definitely important, but like I think the last time I looked at the Ethereum P2P network, it's like 10,000 nodes. No idea if that's right. It was a random website I found.
I think it's more, but I think discoverable is around 10, 12,000.
Yeah, I definitely think full nodes are important, but I don't necessarily know that 10,000 full nodes is important. You need like one public explorer that if it starts out of sync.
Well, ideally, every user runs a full node, and like we will get there once we've snarkified the beacon chain and the ZK and the EVM. But yeah, certainly the validators need to be running full nodes because they need to know what the canonical chain is. And so if we have 10,000 operators, then we need 10,000 full nodes. But ideally, we have millions of full nodes because every user is running a full node.
But not even that. You can also argue that every single exchange, every single service provider,
right,
everyone who's interacting with Ethereum on a larger scale,
yeah,
like, even if you ignore the users,
yeah,
need to run the full node.
I mean.
Oh. Hold it.
But I mean, why wouldn't I just run a light client for most applications and then rely on full nodes for very specific things that only full nodes can do?
You can do that. It's about your risk tolerance. So if your risk tolerance is not that high, you can just run a light client. But I can't imagine someone like Binance, for example, relying on a light client to basically process user deposits or withdrawals.
That's true. Okay, so I don't have too many questions.
Anything else we disagree on?
Yeah. What else do you guys disagree? Give me something else you guys disagree on.
Should base sequencing just?
Okay, so let's talk about slashing in the context of layer 2s. I don't fully understand that at all. As in, so what's a scenario where, let's say, Scroll or Arbitrum would slash?
Let's say Arbitrum.
Let's Arbitrum. Yeah. Let's Arbitrum. That is not here, right? Okay. Yeah. Would slash?
We can shit talk them now. So for example, if Arbitrum runs their own standalone consensus and there's an equivocation, you can slash on the L1. The other thing that you can do with L2s that you can't currently do with Ethereum is, for example, slash for an invalid state proposal. So for example, if the block is agreed on that later turns out to have an invalid state root, you can slash everyone who voted for that block, etc. There are certain things that you can do that are either difficult on an L1 or the L1 can fall back on the full node. So it makes sense to slash for L2s.
Anyone disagrees with this? That's disappointing.
So boring.
I mean, I disagreed with one of the earlier statements said in the panel, which is that as a client, there might be a bug and they can make mass slashing for this one client. I think a lot of the responsibility for slashing actually is on the operator, not on the client. And the reason is that you have this notion of remote signing, where the signing is done remotely from the client. And then you have this notion as well as of an anti-slasher. So you can have a TE, for example, that holds the private keys and is built to not slash. And like these anti-slashers are like 10 lines of code. They're very simple to formally verify even. And so we shouldn't have client bugs as an excuse for mass slashing.
What's the impact of slashing on the level of decentralization? Would you say that Ethereum is able to kind of be more decentralized because it relies on programmatic slashing? No?
It's decentralized in spite of slashing, like despite of.
Tell me more.
I just think certain things that slashing introduces side effects. So as I mentioned before, it's more difficult to have delegation enshrined in the protocol. And I think by now it's pretty obvious that any proof of stake protocol degrades to a delegated proof of stake protocol at some point. Most of the users are not going to stake themselves. And on top of that, LSTs you're an exception.
No.
And we need people like you for long tail stuff. But like the majority of the users are going to just use Lido or Coinbase or whatever else. And then on top of that, it's like liquid staking tokens. If you want to enshrine liquid staking tokens, I struggle to imagine how that would work with slashing, whereas without slashing, okay, yeah. But without slashing, it's actually doable. So I think there are certain reasons why I can see why slashing can be a decentralizing force. I think Ethereum was lucky enough that it came early, and so by the time we transitioned to proof of stake, it actually had a lot of network effects, etc. So it was natural that it's going to decentralize to some point.
So, well, this is my opportunity to fund Ethereum just to create more excitement here. Sometimes I feel Ethereum's consensus is like too complicated, right? So eventually we have ended up with DPoS. There's Lido, Coinbase, Kraken. And I mean, it's like this DPoS, and then there is the long tail stuff, right? Which is take from home me, right? and my son unplugging the thing, right? So yeah, so would we have? I mean, if the end result is anyways like some kind of DPoS, shouldn't Ethereum simplify the consensus and probably switch to a DPoS type of model?
Just 1 second. DPoS is not a consensus, it's a simple resistance mechanism. That's right.
I mean, I disagree with the premise that it's complicated. The consensus is 1,000 lines of Python code. So it's relatively simple. That's the beacon chain state transition function. Now, in terms of like changing to simplify things, there is this kind of magical technology called one-shot signatures, which is a signature scheme where you can't equivocate. And it turns out that we could potentially use those to build proof of stake without any slashing, which still has perfect finality, meaning that if and when a checkpoint gets finalized, it can never get unfinalized. And the reason is that you can't double sign once you've signed. So these one-shot signatures, basically you have a private key where when you sign one message, the private key destroys itself, so you can't sign a second message. And that is doable completely trustlessly using quantum mechanics. So basically the private key is a quantum superposition, which in the process of signing you need to observe and basically destroy and collapse.
This is happening next month?
I remember reading this and I was like, this is blazed. Like,
is it Ethereum 3.0?
Yeah, or 4.0.
Oh my God, the roadmap. Okay, so any other thoughts? Because I think now we are dealing with external DAs, right? So Avail, for example, is going to take a lot of the blob space, the burden of Ethereum and allowing rollups to scale. The L2s to scale. So are there any considerations there where, let's say, L2s are using external data availability layers with regards to slashing either on L2 or on L1?
The problem with DA and slashing is that it's not objective. So
Tell me, explain.
so the problem is like let's say I share this, I share the block with you, like the block L2 block with you, and you claim that you didn't receive it, and I claim that I sent it to you. It's your network problems. How does somebody else look at it and say, oh, you're right or I'm right? It's impossible to prove. The problem is called the fisherman's problem. So like as a third-party observer, it's impossible to tell whether it's you who's lying or it's me who's lying, and therefore there's no accountable slashing there. You can only do it subjectively, and yeah, I think it's fine for certain use cases. There are certain ways you can improve it. So for example, Metis implemented this thing where they have a one-time window.
They challenged the sequencer who posted the state root to provide the DA. But then the problem is you can grind. So either the sequencer has to provide the bond that gets slashed if they publish, or the person who's challenging needs to provide that bond that pays for publishing that data. And so in either of those situations, long term, it's a grinding attack, which means that long term, no one will be incentivized to post because the sequencer can always just withhold it if the people who are challenging are providing the bond and just slash them when they actually publish the data. And so
I understood this completely, but yeah, carry on.
you sure? No. Yeah, sorry. It's yeah. So I think people are going to come up with ways to do slashing for external DA. It's still going to be not very clean or pretty.
So you are saying, okay. So Justin, you were going to say something there? No? Pranav? What are the research areas in the slashing space? As in, are there any research considerations? Is it a fully understood problem? We don't, or, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one interesting thing on the eigenlayer side is kind of on the insurance part, which I think is basically fully not understood, I would say.
You mean the pricing of the insurance?
Like the whole thing. And so, it's easy to say we have, okay, so you can slash stuff. Then what do you do with it? I think is a very interesting question. The easiest is to burn it. I think eigenlayer is proposing you could do something else. And I think...
who do you give it to? Who gets the money?
It's a very hard question, right? And so in that sense, I think it's a very open research problem.
Airdrop.
Very fun. Yeah, it could be the best. Like collectively giving back to everybody, maybe that works. But at least like as a research problem, can people buy claims to that? How do you price those claims? Who adjudicates those claims? Is the whole enterprise failed?
Yeah. So this is the okay. Just to FUD Ethereum a bit more, this social layer and social consensus thing is something I find very annoying as once upon a time developer, right? I like things to run automatically, programmatically, just have the certainty that people won't get involved, and there won't be any politics in it, and there will be no multi-sig and all that stuff, right? So. Whereas when I'm on Twitter, then I read a lot of stuff saying Ethereum strength is the social layer and eigenlayer, right? So I was asking Shriram if, bro, how is this different from a multisig? So, if people have to kind of get together and decide what actually happens. So what are these? How do we? I mean, is there a future for Ethereum where it moves more into being this censorship-resistant, automated, system that just does? There was a time when. Ethereum was all about immutability, and that was before Ethereum Classic, right? So it's immutable. No one will get involved, and then it's like, bro, can you stop trading? So what's the future for Ethereum? Are we going to see more social?
I mean, I think you hope not, but I think to some extent, blockchains are just like a social technology, right? They make it very easy to coordinate.
That's what we were trying to change with Bitcoin, right? So
well, I would say the innovation of Bitcoin is you can, as a person, you can just believe like a math and like code or something, and you can just coordinate on that. Yeah. But there still is social coordination on like believing that's the right math or code or something, right? Like it's like you can't we don't actually live inside a computer. We can't make the computer everything. To some extent, the social layer has to get involved just for it to make sense. Yeah. And I think the main goal of making robust blockchains is to minimize that as much as possible, but it's impossible to fully delete it. I think as the world changes, things might change, and to some extent, it's very difficult to make it perfectly evolve kind of forever and have perfect foresight in that way.
And I think it's important to add that social layer is always going to supersede everything else. So even if you even if you say that your signature scheme is perfect and ideal and everything, the social layer can just say, yeah, we just don't accept it, we'll ignore it. So yeah, I think it's difficult to imagine a world where the social layer doesn't decide what the underlying tech does.
Okay.
I think it's just a matter of time before SHA-256 is broken, and then Bitcoin is definitely going to have to involve the social layer. That could be my ending comment.
That's a good one. Okay, great. So any other questions from the audience? Prabal?
I can, yeah. Recently there was a paper by Tim Roughgarden from the A16Z on like the economics limit of like permissionless consensus. One thing he mentioned there like was that like in a partially synchronous system, like if the adversary who is causing the consistency violation actually becomes big enough, it's hard to actually for the honest nodes to target the punishment towards them. So just want to know your like take on that, like from like Ethereum side and like also like other PoS networks.
Yeah, so I think the main technical point is in partial synchrony, the problem is when you're in GST, right? And so the real concern is basically there's no way to guarantee the honest nodes see the kind of certificate of guilt, right, from the Byzantine nodes and then slash them before those Byzantine nodes can kind of like sell their stake or like withdraw their stake and kind of off product, yeah, like basically like convert their stake to cash and then basically being able to slash them. I think in practice this doesn't really matter. I think it's kind of it's a very nice technical result, but I think kind of what Tim and his co-authors kind of showed is basically if you're in a model of synchrony where as long as you have some upper bound on the network delay, you're kind of okay. And in particular, they make the point that this bound can be like really, really long, right? In particular, it just needs to be long enough, or it needs to be shorter than the withdrawal queue, basically, right? And so as long as you have that, you're kind of fine. I think in practice, we do have that, right? Like you can make that delta like a day, and it's probably fine for all practical purposes. And so I think the main point of the result is like kind of really like kind of in a nice formal model showing this exact dependence on kind of the delay it takes for honest parties to see a certificate of guilt. But I think in practice, we have that delay, and so it's not too big of a problem for Ethereum.
Kind of like a follow-up question to Justin, like, so since like with that, we have the IP that we might allow like validators to consolidate their stake, and that might affect like how the withdrawal queue works, like for maybe like larger validators or smaller. How do you think like that affects, since like slashing is kind of dependent on the withdrawal queue because of the message delay? So just want to know that.
To be honest, I'm not that deep in the weeds in like withdrawal queue stuff. So I don't know if I have a great answer. It's probably just case dependent. And I mean, it's kind of just as long as you kind of do the math and make sure that the bounds you have set in place kind of match the network bounds that we expect. I think it shouldn't be too concerning, but I don't know if somebody else has more detailed thoughts.
I mean, I think MaxiB is basically designed in such a way that the queuing mechanism that doesn't really change. So the queuing is not done on a per validator basis; it's done on a per unit of stake basis. So if you have, a validator with 320 ETH, that would be the same as 10 validators currently exiting.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Oh yeah, I can ask. Anyway, thanks for the beautiful answer. So I can understand the dilemma, right? To slash or not to slash. I'm an engineer, but I also have a PhD in economics, right? So, but I want to like focus more on this engineering versus economics, right? Optimal theory. So we understand there are like risk of code failures as such. Like the theory holds when there are lower, right? 2%, 3%, right? But similarly, we are building up this the restaking phenomena, right, which takes a lot of value from Ethereum. And there is also an optimum theory of market failure, like what happens when the level of staking increases to, let's say, 100%, and then you have the operators or into the no slashing mode under the assumption that you have given the power to them because of this code failure, but we are into that risky zone, right? Which I think Ajit pointed out in between trying to not FUD eigenlayer. So what are the fail-safe measures there then, like to slash or not to slash? How does it work?
So this is where I think you do need the social layer to get involved, especially in the early stages of a protocol like EigenLayer, where you say, look, we don't understand everything that can happen, right? We can't really simulate all possible scenarios, come up with a completely robust economic model that allocates incentives perfectly. So you kind of need that committee structure at the end to make those decisions.
Thanks. But are we again relying on that concern of like, let's say, I think Vitalik wrote like, don't overload the consensus part.
I think that's been solved, right? That's exactly what the Eigen token pretty much does. That you only slash the restaked Ethereum for objectively attributable failures, and then everything else you rely on. You essentially slash the Eigen, and there is a forking mechanism in case there is disagreement. Sorry to defend my bags.
Yeah.
At some point, we end up needing trust me, bro security.
Yeah, at some point you do need like that social layer to make arbitrations. If no other questions, then thank you so much. Hope this was at least entertaining, and hopefully informative as well. And I really would like to thank the panel for educating me, especially, and the rest of us on this particularly complex topic. And thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.